My name is Hazel Thompson, I'm 41 years old, and on that October night in the grand ballroom of the Rosemont Hotel in Seattle, I sat there in a plum velvet dress, silently witnessing the man who once vowed to love me forever turn me into a stranger in my own story. Crystal lights reflected off sparkling champagne glasses, a jazz band played softly beneath the elegant laughter of nearly 200 guests, familiar faces from real estate, media, and even a few local politicians I had once invited to dinner at our home. Then my husband, Jonathan, walked onto the stage, his arm wrapped around a young woman with softly curled blonde hair. Her white silk gown clung to a very visible pregnancy. I knew this moment would come, but when it did, it felt like my heart was crushed by an invisible hand. "Thank you all for joining us today," Jonathan said, his voice steady like he was introducing a $1 million project. "I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce someone very special. This is Sienna Hale, the new creative director of Thompson Realty, and the mother of my son-to-be." Each word cut into my ears, glasses froze mid-air. A few gasps echoed through the room. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward me, where I sat not far from the stage, quietly positioned in a wheelchair that Jonathan had thoughtfully asked staff to place out of the way. "She is the future I've always dreamed of," Jonathan concluded, raising his glass of champagne and locking eyes with me. Should I have crumbled? Let the tears fall to secure the role of the heartbroken wife? I chose to smile, a faint smile, the kind only those paying close attention would notice, and feel their spine chill. I had been the co-founder of the firm with my husband, the lead architect, the recipient of the 2016 Green Design Award. But 3 years ago, during a site inspection at the Eco Point project, the scaffolding collapsed. My spine shattered. And so did a piece of my life. Jonathan played the devoted husband well. He hired private nurses, renovated our penthouse for accessibility, and praised my resilience at fundraising events. He kissed my forehead in public, but behind the scenes I was a silent shadow, a burden. And now, he brought his mistress to the center of a gala I had founded 5 years ago, to declare to the entire industry that he was moving into a new chapter. And me? I was the faint footnote in his life story. Sienna glanced down at her belly, brushing the smooth satin. Jonathan placed his hand over hers, his smile betraying no shame, only pride. I once believed Jonathan was the reward for years I fought alone to rise in a cutthroat architectural world. We met in Portland when I was 25, an intern architect, and he was a real estate agent with a smile that made rain feel like sunshine. Jonathan couldn't sketch, didn't understand ratios or structure, but he knew how to sell a dream. And I was the one who shaped those dreams. With every pen stroke, every curve of every structure, we launched our firm 2 years later, Thompson Whitmore Studio. A name I once believed reflected an equal partnership, but now I understand. The brand only held power as long as I could still stand. Success came like a lightning bolt. In our first year, we won the contract to renovate the Carnegie Library. The next year, our sustainable housing project, Riverview, landed us a feature in Architectural Digest. People called us the power couple of Northwest architecture. I buried myself in models, blueprints, and technical teams. Jonathan walked into meetings, hit play on the presentation, and said, "This is our vision." I didn't mind. I never needed the spotlight. I just wanted to create something that mattered. We planned to start a family after the Evergreen Hills project, then postponed it for a speaking invitation in Berlin. Then again, when we landed the Harmony Point development. I thought we had time. Until the day the 9th floor platform at the Harmony Tower gave way while I was inspecting the beam structure. I don't remember the fall, only the shriek of collapsing steel, the harsh white lights of the operating room, and the doctor's voice saying to Jonathan, "She'll need a wheelchair long term. The spinal damage is severe." During the first 3 weeks in the hospital, Jonathan never left my side. He brought his laptop, signed contracts on Zoom, and smiled softly each time I opened my eyes. I thought, this is what real love looks like. But real love doesn't dim like a motion sensor light. It doesn't vanish when you're no longer able to work 16-hour days. Jonathan hired a team to redesign our penthouse. He installed a small elevator, lowered the countertops, added slip-resistant tiles to the bathroom. On the surface, he was the perfect husband. But inside, something had changed. We used to discuss every window detail in a project. Now, the longest daily conversation we shared was, "Did you take your pills?" I started to feel like a logistics item. A side project, not a partner. Still, I tried to come back. 3 months after the accident, I suggested working remotely on a new project. Jonathan nodded. But soon after, the design team received instructions that I was on extended leave for recovery. "I didn't make that decision," I said when I found out. "I was just thinking of what's best for you, Hazel," he replied, eyes shifting. "You need time." Deep down, I knew I was being edged out of the very empire I helped build. One May morning, I quietly entered the office before anyone arrived. My desk was gone, no drawings, no models, no project files under my name in the system. In the conference room, my nameplate had been replaced. It now read, Sienna Hale, lead designer. At that time, I still didn't know who Sienna was. All I felt was cold, a chill that didn't come from the weather, but from the quiet, decisive withdrawal of the man who once promised to walk beside me for life. I don't know who sent the first message. It came on a Wednesday morning while I was sitting in the small office next to the balcony, trying to finish some sketches for the community project I had taken on myself. The only project that still made me feel like I was truly an architect. The message came from an unknown number, no name saved. Just one line. "Ham didn't just step away from your life, he's building a new one." Attached was a photo, Jonathan, standing in front of a private OB/GYN clinic in Capitol Hill, his hand resting on the back of a visibly pregnant young woman. There was no doubt. It was Sienna Hale. Her belly stretched under a beige cashmere sweater. Jonathan was smiling, a smile I hadn't seen in 2 years, relaxed, radiant, like that was exactly where he belonged. I felt my knees go cold, even though I was wrapped in a blanket. There were no tears. Just a piercing silence, as if reality itself had cracked open. I didn't say anything to Jonathan that night. When he came home at 8:30, his shoes dust-free, his breath still minty fresh, I simply asked, "How was the meeting with the Korean partners?" He nodded, took off his coat and replied like it had been rehearsed. "Productive? I'll have to fly to Seoul at the end of the month to finalize the deal." But in my mind, the image of him standing next to Sienna, his hand resting on her back like he was guarding a precious life, wouldn't leave. 2 days later, I asked Rebecca, an old friend who used to work in finance, to help me review the company expenses. Jonathan's company. "Hazel, are you sure you want to know?" Rebecca asked, her eyes serious, not mocking, just careful. "I need the truth," I replied, oddly calm. "Whatever it is." Less than a week later, she sent me a thick packet of documents. "There are some suspicious transfers," Rebecca said. "None of them show up in the reports filed to the board." I opened the first page, an account in Nevada, a deposit of $75,000 for a luxury apartment in the Union Green district. Owner, Jonathan. User, redacted. Until I turned to the next page, Sienna Hale, listed as the mail recipient at that address. I couldn't tell what hurt more, the betrayal, or how carefully it had been planned. From then on, I started noticing every little detail. Jonathan's meeting schedule suddenly changed. Quick business trips to San Diego that, oddly, left no drafts or legal paperwork behind tied to the city. I checked the secondary credit card Jonathan forgot to unlink from my phone. There were charges at Tiffany & Co., the Little Palm Inn, a luxury resort on the Washington coast. Places I had never been invited to. There was even a payment for a white Range Rover Sport, registered under a third party, but the delivery address matched the Union Green apartment. One evening in late June, I called Lucille, my former assistant, now working part-time at Thompson Realty. "Have you ever seen Jonathan and Sienna spending time alone together?" I asked. Lucille hesitated, then exhaled. "Yeah, but they always said it was for creative meetings. Lately, they've been going for late lunches. Just the other day, I saw Jonathan put his hand on her shoulder. I'm not sure what to think." "It's okay, Lucille, thank you. You've helped me more than you know." I hung up, not angry with her. If I were my younger self 5 years ago, I might have thought they were just close colleagues too. But I was no longer naive enough to believe those excuses. I printed everything out, organized the receipts, statements, and photos into a file. Inside were the fragmented pieces of a parallel life Jonathan had carefully constructed, one that I was the last to know about. But I didn't plan to blow everything up immediately. I wanted to understand it all before I stepped into the light. Because if architecture taught me anything, it's this: to rebuild from ruin, you must first tear out the faulty foundation. One morning, as I opened the left-hand drawer of my bedside table to grab a bottle of painkillers, I noticed something strange. The blue pill I usually took at night had been replaced with a white one, with a faint split line. I froze. I didn't recall changing prescriptions. My primary doctor, Dr. Lauren Kim, always documented every adjustment carefully. I flipped through my medical log. No notes about any switch. I called Martina, the physical therapist who had been working with me for over a year. "Do you have time to stop by this afternoon?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "I need you to help me take a closer look at a few medications." Martina arrived at 2:30, carrying her professional notebook and a small scale. She inspected each pill label carefully, frowning as she checked the ingredients of 3 of them. "Hazel, do you realize this Rilavax dosage is twice the recommended amount?" I shook my head. "And this one," she pointed to the white bottle, "was actually pulled from circulation last year. It's been linked to memory loss and long-term motor impairment. Who prescribed this for you?" I didn't know how to answer. Since the accident, Jonathan had managed all my medical files. He took me to appointments, he picked up prescriptions. He always said, "Let me handle it. You just focus on recovery." Now I saw it clearly. While I struggled to regain control of my body, he had quietly taken control of both it and my mind. That night, I did something I never imagined I'd have to do in my own home. I emptied all my remaining medication onto the table and photographed each pill. Then I sent an email to Dr. Lauren with a direct question. "Is this a treatment plan you ever prescribed for me?" The reply came just a few hours later. "Hazel, I never prescribed 2 of those medications. They're not in any of my records." What had only been a gut feeling started becoming clear. The dazed feeling after dinner. How I'd sleep through the morning even after taking just 1 sleep aid. The moments I couldn't remember what I'd said the day before, and blamed it on aging memory. No, it wasn't aging, it wasn't the aftermath of the accident. It was a plan. I stopped taking the pills, quietly. Instead, I bought identical-looking substitutes from a pharmacy Martina recommended. I poured them into the old bottles, kept the original labels, and arranged everything in order, so nothing would look out of place. Within 10 days, the fog in my head started lifting. My eyes no longer strained after 2 hours of reading blueprints. I could recall every detail from a Zoom meeting with the community design team. I thought maybe that was enough. But one evening I happened to read a text message Jonathan had left open on the tablet in the kitchen. "Just a few more months. The lawyer said the guardianship process needs enough psychological evidence, but I've got almost all of it now. She has no idea." Sent to Gregory Chambers, a legal expert in guardianship law. I sat there frozen. Jonathan hadn't just betrayed me with another woman. He was preparing to seize legal control of my entire life. If he succeeded, he could commit me to a facility, replace my doctor, control my finances, sell the company and the condo, and stamp every decision with a court order. And me? I'd be labeled as someone incapable of self-care. I called Martina the next morning. "I can't prove everything on my own," I said, my voice shaking. "I need an independent doctor, someone you trust, someone with no ties to Jonathan." She paused, then said, "I'll set you up with Dr. Ethan Walsh. He specializes in cognitive rehabilitation and evaluation. Fair, not afraid of outside pressure." 3 days later, I sat in Dr. Walsh's office, detailing the entire ordeal. I showed him photos of the pills, the prescriptions, Martina's notes. He listened without interrupting, then said only one sentence. "Hazel, in my opinion, this is no longer a medical issue. This is a case for urgent legal intervention." I gripped the armrests of my wheelchair. I had lost the ability to walk because of an accident, but I would not let myself be knocked down again, just because I trusted the wrong person. Starting that week, every morning carried more purpose than any day since the accident. Jonathan thought I was still home sketching idly and reading architecture books to pass the time. The truth was, I had returned to physical therapy with a level of intensity he never imagined. Martina didn't ask many questions, she just looked me in the eyes and said, "If you really want your life back, Hazel, then we go all the way, body and truth." We increased the sessions from 2 to 3 times a week, nearly 2 hours each. Gone were the basic routines. Martina brought me back to weighted resistance exercises, balance training, and standing without support. Was it painful? Absolutely. My body reacted like it was waking from a long, drugged sleep. But each drop of sweat on the floor felt like a piece of myself returning. 1 month in, I could stand on my own for nearly 3 minutes. 10 days later, I took 4 steps, holding on to the wooden handrail Jonathan had once asked to be installed just for show. Under Dr. Walsh's guidance, I documented every part of my recovery. Photos of lab results, videos from therapy sessions, confirmation letters from the independent physician. These would serve as evidence, proof to dismantle the psychological prison Jonathan had built to keep me under control. I knew I needed an ally, someone outside his reach, someone who couldn't be manipulated and trusted me enough to fight beside me. I called Naomi my younger sister. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year after a meaningless argument about money and work. I once blamed Naomi for not understanding me, but now I knew it was Jonathan who had quietly created that distance. "Hazel?" Naomi's voice trembled as she picked up. "Are you okay?" I paused, not because I was emotional, but because I didn't know where to begin. "I'm okay, but I need you, and you need to know the truth." We met at a small cafe near Fremont. Naomi arrived early, still wearing her faded hoodie, hair tied up, her eyes visibly anxious. I told her everything. Every pill log, every photo of Jonathan with Sienna, even the company expenses I once believed were just operating costs. Naomi didn't interrupt. When I finished, she simply said, "You've been silent too long, Hazel. But now you're awake. And I'm here." Naomi was the one who introduced me to Mason Blake, an attorney who specialized in cases of financial abuse and medical coercion. He was a college friend of Naomi's. And more than anyone, he understood how easily systems can be manipulated to crush a woman, especially one recovering from trauma. "Jonathan is trying to use medical records and unstable behavior to apply for legal guardianship over you?" Mason raised an eyebrow after skimming through the file I brought in. "Not just that," I replied. "He's hiding income, opened private accounts, and signed contracts without my knowledge, even though the company still carries both our names." "Perfect," Mason said, like he'd just spotted a fatal flaw. "Then we're not just pushing back. We're doing it methodically, coldly, legally, and in public." My chest stirred with fire. While Mason prepared the preliminary suit, Naomi and I combed through the accounting files Rebecca had sent, an offshore account in Bermuda, a series of side contracts under the Union Green project, Jonathan's signature only. We uncovered a penthouse under renovation, funded with money pulled from the Green Architecture Initiative, the nonprofit I founded 7 years ago, a fund originally created to improve housing access for people with disabilities. That was the final blow. This wasn't just about marriage or betrayal anymore. Jonathan had twisted my ideals into fuel for his double life. I looked at Naomi and asked slowly, "Do you think, if we expose all of this, he'll survive it?" Naomi gave a dry smile. "No, Hazel. But you will, and this time, you won't be standing alone." Jonathan couldn't hide his excitement when he told me the 10th anniversary gala for Thompson Realty would be held at our own house. "So it's easier for you?" "Not much travel," he smiled. "And it'll be touching for everyone to see we're still together after everything." I traced the grain of the oak table with my fingertips, giving the faintest tilt of my head, just enough to keep him reassured. "Sounds lovely," I replied, voice hazy, like a woman who's long been used to sitting where she's told. Jonathan smiled, satisfied. He had no idea that the moment he left the room, I picked up my phone and sent Naomi a one-word message. Again. 3 weeks before the gala, I entered the final stage of the plan. Martina intensified my training so I could stand on stage for at least 4 uninterrupted minutes. Naomi handled digital security and data backups. Mason finalized the notarized legal documentation, ready for public release if necessary. I also had another ally, June Weller, an investigative reporter from the Seattle Daily Ledger, who had previously exposed a major charity fraud ring in Oregon. Mason had introduced us. June came to my home on a drizzly morning. After 2 hours reading through the files, she looked up and said, "If this is presented right, it won't just destroy Jonathan's reputation, it could trigger a federal investigation." "I don't need him to go to prison unless the court finds sufficient evidence," I replied. "But I do need the whole city to know the truth. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been manipulated the way I was." To keep Jonathan unsuspecting, I continued playing the part of the gentle, fragile wife. I pretended to forget physical therapy appointments. Let him help me into the car, even though I'd been able to stand on my own for over a week. I even let him mix my evening meds, then quietly poured them down the drain when his back was turned. At night, while Jonathan rambled about the next generation vision slides and the big reveal, I nodded with pretend pride. I even suggested using cream-colored flowers to create a more warm and welcoming vibe. He had no idea Naomi had installed a discreet remote control device into the presentation system. With one tap from my palm, the entire Jonathan Vision slideshow would be replaced with the real files from Thompson Realty. Financial transfers, affair emails, and altered medical records. A week before the gala, I chose a deep navy silk taffeta dress, Jonathan's old favorite, the one I wore the first time we won a community design award. When he saw me trying it on, he hesitated. "You sure you want to wear that? It doesn't look very wheelchair friendly." "Then make sure you seat me somewhere I won't feel out of place." Jonathan's expression softened. He liked it when I didn't push back. He didn't realize that from that very seat, his world was about to collapse. 2 days before the event, June sent me a draft of the article she'd publish if everything went according to plan. The headline was simple: "The Truth Behind the Glass Walls, Jonathan Reed's Double Life." I read to the final paragraph where June wrote, "But the woman didn't fall. She stood, both literally and symbolically, and told the story that everyone needed to hear." I closed the laptop, oddly calm. The night before the gala, I received a package from anonymous sender. A bouquet of white lilies with a handwritten note. "Dear Hazel, I don't know you personally, but you are the reason I found the courage to leave the man who controlled me for 4 years. Do what you need to do. I'll be in the audience, quietly rooting for you." I finished reading and placed a hand over my heart, where it beat steady and slow. Jonathan thought he was leading me into the final act. But he didn't know I was the one writing the script. That night, the glass house in North Queen Anne glowed warmly under golden lights. Over 100 guests gathered beneath the glass dome I had designed 7 years ago, back when Thompson Realty was still a shared dream between Jonathan and me. I was wheeled into the center of the hall at 8:20, seated near a dimly lit table, just as Jonathan had quietly instructed his assistant. Visible, but not too visible, I'd overheard him say on a call. I wore a dark blue silk dress that gently hugged my slowly recovering frame. My hair was neatly pinned, my lips painted a deep crimson. Guests nodded approvingly. "Hazel looks elegant." But no one noticed the small black remote in my hand hidden beneath the tablecloth. Jonathan stepped up to the podium at 8:30. The microphone buzzed to life just after the clinking of glasses. "Thank you all for being here on such a special occasion. 10 years ago, Hazel and I started this journey with nothing but our bare hands and a bold vision." He looked over at me, smiling like a motivational speaker. "But tonight, I want to announce a new beginning, a new vision for the next decade. And joining me is someone I deeply trust, someone who brings new energy and creativity to Thompson Realty." I saw the spotlight shift to the back of the hall, where Sienna Hale entered, her hand resting gently on her pregnant belly. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some turned to glance at me, eyes filled with awkward sympathy. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Jonathan stepped off the stage, took Sienna's hand and led her up. "Allow me to introduce our new creative director and the mother of my upcoming child." Polite, hesitant applause followed. A few stiff nods. Sienna looked down, avoiding my gaze, but I remained still, smiling. And I pressed the button. The LED screen behind them, meant to display renderings of the Horizon North project, suddenly flickered. A few guests jumped. Jonathan turned around, slightly flustered. "Seems we're experiencing a minor technical glitch." But the image sharpened. the cover of my medical file stamped in red letters. Dosage altered without physician authorization. The room fell completely silent. Next came a photo comparison of my original prescriptions against the actual pills, followed by a signed statement from Dr. Ethan Walsh. Patient exhibits signs of having been medicated contrary to rehabilitation objectives. I calmly rolled my wheelchair toward the stage. The spotlight followed. All eyes turned to me. Jonathan stepped halfway toward me, trying to steady his voice. Hazel, maybe we should... Sit down, Jonathan, I said evenly. I haven't even started. I looked around the room, voice clear and unwavering. I used to think I was simply the victim of an accident. But I wasn't. I was the target of a plan orchestrated by the man I once trusted most. On the screen, emails appeared one by one. Jonathan requesting changes to my treatment plan, refusing independent medical consultations, authorizing the transfer of funds from our charity account to cover penthouse renovations at Union Green, where Sienna now lived. The penthouse, I pointed at the invoice on screen, was paid for using money from the Green Habitat Fund, a fund many of you donated to believing it would help build accessible housing for the disabled. Gasps grew louder. Jonathan stepped forward, raising his voice. This is retaliation because I chose a new life. Hazel, you're not well. You've been paranoid for over a year. Everyone knows. I slowly rose from the wheelchair. A collective gasp filled the room. I reached for the folding cane from my side pouch, took a step, then another. No one spoke, no one smiled. Even Sienna covered her mouth, eyes wide. Not paranoid, I'm awake, and now, those in authority should know what I know. At that moment the doors opened. 3 men and 1 woman entered, wearing jackets marked with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. One of them held out a badge. Mr. Jonathan Reed? We need to speak with you regarding allegations of embezzling charity funds and falsifying medical records. Jonathan turned pale, stumbling back. A few guests stood abruptly and began to leave. I stepped off the stage and past Sienna. I don't blame you, I said softly. But from now on, don't let anyone else decide what's worth believing. She lowered her head, tears welling in her eyes. In the fading lights of the home that once symbolized a shared dream, I walked slowly but steadily. No longer the woman shoved into the corner at her own event. I had returned. Not for revenge, but to reclaim what was always mine. 3 months after the gala, Jonathan Reed's name disappeared from every press release in Seattle's real estate circuit. His personal bank accounts were frozen. Strategic partners publicly announced the termination of all collaboration. The penthouse at Union Green was sealed. Sienna's white Range Rover was seized for investigation. Jonathan was indicted on 3 primary charges: embezzlement of charitable funds, falsification of medical records, and abuse of guardianship powers for personal gain. Though there wasn't enough evidence to connect him directly to my accident, his actions over the 3 years that followed were too calculated to deny. Sienna, after cooperating with investigators, moved to Bend, Oregon. In a brief email she sent me, she wrote, "I lived in a world Jonathan created, and it wasn't until you stepped into the light that I realized I'd never really been awake." I didn't reply, not out of hatred, simply because I no longer saw myself as a victim. I renamed the firm Whitmore Studio, removing all traces of Jonathan. Naomi became co-director, overseeing community strategy and integrated technology. Mason helped restructure the Green Habitat Fund with a fully independent board and absolute transparency. The first project I launched was the Restore House, a rehabilitation center for women with disabilities and survivors of abuse. It was built on the very land Jonathan once planned to turn into a monument of power. We kept the original foundation. We didn't tear it down. I wanted it to stand as a symbol. From the rubble of manipulation, a place for healing could rise. Martina is now the director of rehabilitation there. We still meet weekly in the therapy garden, where my sister and I plant rows of lavender along the glass fence. "You didn't just survive, Hazel," she once said, the day I stood up during the center's first open session. "You made the rest of us believe we could stand too." I visited Jonathan one last time in early spring, when the snow had melted off the rooftops of the federal prison in Tacoma. He looked different. Thinner. Pale. Hair overgrown. There was still a flicker of arrogance in his eyes, but it was dulled by fatigue and confusion. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting down behind the glass partition. "I know I don't deserve it, but I still hope." "Hope for what?" I asked, my voice light, like I was asking about the weather. Jonathan lowered his head, his fingers interlaced, knuckles white. "Hope you might say you forgive me." I wanted to see clearly the face of a man who once controlled every part of my life, now sitting in a place where he controlled nothing. Forgiveness isn't a gift you get to ask for, Jonathan. It's something I'll decide to give, if and when I feel it serves me. He closed his eyes and gave a faint, bitter smile. I stood up, leaning on my cane. "Goodbye, Jonathan. I hope in time you learn the difference between building an empire and building something that actually matters." I didn't look back. 1 year later, I was invited to speak at the statewide design festival. I stepped onto the stage in a simple cream-colored suit, holding the speech Naomi had so carefully edited. "To me," I began, "architecture isn't just about creating beautiful spaces. It's about shaping places where people feel like they belong, whether they're standing, walking, or sitting." In the audience, I saw Naomi smile. Martina gave a small, knowing nod. And among the guests sat a few women I didn't recognize, women from the Restore House. They knew my story. And now, I was part of theirs. My story isn't just about exposing a betrayer. It's about reclaiming control over a life that once felt lost. I had been trapped, physically, emotionally, in a web of manipulation. But through resolve, courage, and the right people by my side, I stood again, both literally and figuratively. Today I'm not just surviving. I'm living in alignment with my values. And if you're reading this in the middle of your own wreckage, believe this: you can begin again. In your own way. What do you think of Hazel's choice? Do you believe that truth always finds a way to surface? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and life.